highly successful entrepreneur, a New York Times bestselling author, and the founder of Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey. Her brand was inspired by the man who taught Jack Daniel how to distill, Nearest Green. Today, we discuss everything from her personal journey to discovering Nearest Green's story, to building a distillery, a global brand, and also her new book, Love and Whiskey. Fawn, I am so happy to have you on the Spirits Business podcast today. Welcome to London.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm so excited to get into the conversation about Uncle Nearest and about your journey as well. And for any listeners who maybe aren't familiar with your story, you have so much success as an entrepreneur, you're a best-selling author, and you founded the Uncle Nearest whiskey brand. If you were to kind of summarize your purpose for getting up in the morning that keeps driving you, how would you summarize that?
God's will. That is what I want to do every day as I go through the day is, what am I here on earth for? What is that purpose? And executing that. So I have a very low tolerance for low efficiency. I am an incredibly efficient person, and that has everything to do with the fact that I'm purpose-driven, and that's what wakes me up in the morning. That's what gets me out of bed, and I'm always excited to get out of bed.
Where do you think that drive comes from?
I think it's just innate. It's just what's inside of me. I don't know that because I've never been anyone else. I can't explain it, but this is how I'm wired. This is who I am. And so I only know it one way.
What is it for you in particular that you love about the whiskey industry?
You know what? What I love is the stories behind the brands. Now, the brand has to be really good I'm not one of those people who, because it's a great story, I'm going to drink garbage. That I will not do. But the marrying of a great story and a great product, I just love it because you're sitting there and you're sipping on it, but it creates a natural conversation. There aren't very many things in life that you buy that you will then sit next to maybe a stranger for the next half hour talking about it. And so I think that's what's unique specifically about the whiskey business, because other spirits don't really have that. I mean, who's sitting around and talking about the backstory of a vodka? Like, it's just, there's not a whole lot. The story is very short. But when you're talking about a bourbon brand like Uncle Nearest, people will sit for hours and talk about it. And I think that that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's an incredible category. And like you say, there is so much history there, and there are so many stories to tell.
Absolutely.
And you discovered an incredible one.
Yes.
And you have written a book that includes this wonderful story about Nearest Green. This isn't your first book, so I'd love to know, how does this book compare to others that you have worked on?
They're all about love. So all three books that I've ever written, this one has love in the title. It's the first one to have love in the title, but they're all about relationships. They're all about love. This one just happens to be a relationship between Jack Daniel and Nearest Green. And it is a very surprising relationship as a mentor-mentee, as a father figure, as a friend, as an ally. And so it's very different than what you're expecting usually coming out of the American South in the 19th century. So it is very different in that regard. But at the core, as you go through the book, you realize that if there are four themes, it's love, honor, respect, and hope. And that's in all three of my books.
Amazing. And Love and Whiskey is a very different kind of historical book.
It is.
Isn't it? And it very much goes into your personal journey as well. How did you come to the decision that that was how you wanted to tell the story?
It couldn't be told without it, because my story has become so intertwined with the finding, the uncovering of the story of Nearest Green. There was no way for me to do it. When I first began writing this back in 2016, the story was a period piece more so, and it really exclusively focused on Nearest and Jack and the town of Lynchburg and all the things going on. And it was a bit of a bore. Like, it's because you're going into the past, but you're not really seeing what is coming out of the future because I went into the past. So that the story is far more interesting now when you're talking about the story of Jack, the story of Nearest, and the story of the rise of Uncle Nearest, the whiskey brand.
And you are so integral to that story and bringing it to a global audience. So you're also very, very open about your own journey in the book. And I was reading the first few pages, and you really share some very candid, some very hard-hitting personal experiences that you went through. Your decision to leave home at 15, and then your years spent living in homeless shelters. I wonder if you could take us back to that time and tell us a bit more about how those experiences shaped who you are today.
Yeah, well, the fortitude that I have, I had someone ask me yesterday how much of me is nurture versus nature. And I said, I think there are certain things that nature, it created me exactly the way that I am. But then this fortitude that I have comes from having experienced so many challenges and coming out on the other side of it. The best way I could describe it is coming into London, the turbulences were crazy. There was a few pockets where the turbulences were just like rocking the whole plane. And I was laying there, and what it felt like to me is, when you put a baby in one of those rockers and it just rocks you back and forth and it puts the baby to sleep, that's what a turbulence on a plane is like to me. But it's because I've been through so many turbulences. I know the end result is the plane is going to land. It's going to be fine. No issues. But I also thought about the fact that there are all these other people on the plane that are literally sweating through their clothes.
That would be me. That would be me, the other side of you. Like, how is this woman sleeping through this?
Exactly. And for me, I was like, this is like rocking a baby to sleep. So I believe that those experiences were like life's turbulences. And I've come through so many of them that very little can rock me, because I look at it as, well, I already know how this story ends. The plane is going to land and everybody is safe.
Those experiences, from leaving home and the time you spent moving from shelters, you then actually found that you have quite an entrepreneurial business spirit as well.
I do, yeah, always have. And it's now 30 years of being an entrepreneur. And it's just, I couldn't imagine it any other way. It's how I'm wired. It's how I was always wired. But I also think that if I hadn't left home early, dropped out of high school, I may have gone the traditional route of going to college, going to work for a company, and I've always been a high achiever. So it wouldn't have been hard for me to grow within a company. I'm absolutely certain of that. So I think that my path is really the only path that would have led me to entrepreneurialism.
And to the Nearest Green story as well.
Absolutely. Because this type of story and the way that this is being told, the way that we are now sharing it around the world through Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey, if I wasn't an entrepreneur and that wasn't my mindset, then some people would be reading this book, but a whole lot less would be reading it, and a whole lot fewer people would know the name Nearest Green. And so I'm grateful that I was wired from very early on as an entrepreneur.
And so take us back to the moment when you first started discovering and learning who Nearest Green was, because I believe you were on holiday with your husband at the time, and there was an article about Jack Daniel and Nearest Green. Can you take us back and tell us the story there?
Absolutely. I was in Singapore. It was on the cover of the New York Times International Edition. This was June of 2016, and the headline read, Jack Daniels embraces a hidden ingredient, help from a slave. And there was a photo that accompanied that took up about probably 1/3 of the front page. And it was a photo of who we now know to be Nearest's son, sitting to the right of Jack Daniel. So you have George Green, Nearest's son, and you have Jack Daniel, and then they're surrounded by all of these other men that work for Jack. What we now know about that photo is pretty astonishing. One is the photo in the New York Times was cropped. when you actually look at the full photo, it's not just that George Green is sitting to the right of Jack Daniel. It's that Jack actually ceded the center position of the photo to George, which when you're talking about a man this is his legacy, and he never took another photo with people in it. It's the only known photo of Jack with other people in it. And he chose to put George Green at the center of that photo. The other thing that's pretty remarkable about the photo, if you look closely, everyone else is seated. Jack is standing because Jack never grew to be more than 5'2". And he's standing because his right leg had been amputated. So he's standing on a cane, and that cane and his amputated leg is being covered up by both George Green and his nephew Lem Motlow.
That's so interesting to hear. And it sounds like quite a different interpretation to what was published alongside that story.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the story itself, what Clay Risen wrote, there was never any negativity in that. He was simply stating that prior to that point, there was a preacher and distiller by the name of Dan Call, a white man, that was credited with being the teacher and mentor of Jack Daniel. But the community of Lynchburg always believed that it wasn't Dan Call that taught Jack. It was actually an enslaved man on his property by the name of Nearest Green. And so that was the story that Clay was basically lobbing up. He didn't have a whole lot of time New York Times didn't give him a whole lot of time or a big budget to be able to really do an investigative reporting type of thing into this. So he lobbed it up in hopes that there was enough information there for somebody else to take the ball and finish the play, which is exactly what I did. But in between that time, between me reading it and then me actually sharing my own results after following some of the leads that he put in the story, but then adding to those leads, in between that, the story very quickly became negative. And people began saying that Jack Daniel was a slave owner, that he owned Nearest, that he hid Nearest from the public, and that he stole his recipe. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. And now we all know that. Now that's in the book Love and Whiskey. It's very, very clear. But at that time, that story is what went around the world. A negative story travels so much faster than a positive one. So even though that story was only out there for about a year before I corrected it, to this day, this is now 7 years later, I still have people who reference the original story. Absolutely. I am constantly correcting and updating this story for people because there's just something about negative stories travel really fast.
And I suppose with the era that story comes from, it's easy to see how that actually would be quite a believable situation, which makes your work all the more important to
Absolutely.
debunk all of those untruths. And so what was it about seeing that article that compelled you to pursue that story further? And then where did that journey take you?
Well, there's a couple things, and I can't explain it any other way than to say that I think certain things in life, you find it, and certain things in life find you. And for me, this was it finding me, because this isn't a story that I would have been drawn to. The story became negative so quickly, and I'm not drawn to negativity. I'm not drawn to negative stories. I'm that person who, even if, I don't know if you remember when American Idol, when it first came out, very, very popular, and they would do these little segments where people would embarrass themselves. I'd always have to forward past that because I hate watching people embarrass themselves. And to this day, I'm the exact same way. And so for me, I wouldn't be drawn to a story like this. And yet I was fully captivated by this idea that if this could be proven, it would be the first time in, at that time, my 40-year life, where I could look at a brand, an American brand, a ubiquitous American brand, and say, there was an African American at the start of it. We've heard rumors and rumblings about different companies for so long, but because enslaved people were not allowed to trademark, they weren't allowed to patent, and even when we became free, we still weren't able to trademark and patent for a while. So who knows what inventions are out there? that came from African Americans. So our ability to reclaim those stories are important for our own legacy within America, not for how America views us, but how we view ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And how quickly, from seeing the article, feeling what you felt, did you then decide, let's go to Lynchburg, Tennessee, and research this further?
It was a couple of months. And during that period of time, my niece, who was like a daughter, passed away in a fatal motorcycle accident. And really, I was looking for an escape when I began reading Jack Daniel's Legacy, which is his biography that was written in, or published in 1967, written in 65 and 66. And I got lost in the pages of that book, wanting to not have to deal with the grief of losing someone so young. She was only 28. And so in that moment of looking for hope, I found it in the pages of that book, because you have a book that was written and dedicated to Uncle Jack. That's what everyone in Lynchburg called him. They still call him that to this day. And this book is written about Uncle Jack and for Uncle Jack. But when you read the pages, a couple of things happen within that book. Number one, Nearest and his boys are mentioned more times than Jack's own family. That's astounding for that time frame. In 1967, you didn't include Black people as pivotal into any story, especially coming out of the South. A positive story? Absolutely not. You did not give credit to Black people. You didn't have to. And so you very rarely see credit being given to Black people in that period of time. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that when you're reading the author's words, there are moments in the book where he is speaking of Uncle Nearest with a greater and higher level of respect than Uncle Jack, and the book is about Uncle Jack. And so I'm reading this book and going, who is Nearest Green that the folks of Lynchburg and Jack's descendants would have had to have mentioned him and his boys, George and Eli, so many times for this white reporter from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to include them throughout the pages of the book. So I began looking at it and saying, all right, the whole internet is saying that this story is negative, but I'm not buying it. Because if you want to hide a Black man, you just don't put him in a photo. And you certainly don't document him in the book. And so I began to see this as a story that could possibly be one of our great American stories coming out of the South in the 19th century. And so I knew if I could prove it and I could write it, it would give a lot of people hope. And I did, and it has.
So when you went to Lynchburg, was the plan initially to research this and find the story for the book, or more than to make a whiskey?
For the book, for a movie. And in the early days, we looked at it and thought, we knew nothing about the whiskey business. So thought, we could do a limited edition bottle type of thing, and put it on the map and put it out there. But it wasn't this thought process that it would become this huge brand. But once you start researching the whiskey industry, you realize that's not possible. You either become a huge brand or you die. It's that simple. You got two choices in the industry. You either become big or you get gobbled up, or you just fail.
It's a tough industry to crack. It's definitely not as easy as it looks from the outside. And you actually met with Jack Daniel's descendants when you arrived in Lynchburg, didn't you? What was their reception to you? Because you said there's all this negativity, there's all this kind of misunderstanding of the story and the relationship between Nearest and Jack. What was their response to you arriving in Lynchburg?
Well, the response was, I don't know what their collective response was, but one of the first people that I met there was while I was doing research in the library, and it was who is now Jack's eldest living descendant. At that time, her mother was still alive, so she was the second eldest living descendant. But she came into the library where we were, and we spoke for about 15 minutes, and in that time, she shared with us that the farm, the 313-acre farm where Jack grew up, It's a huge part of the book, Jack Daniel's Legacy. And it's where Nearest Green was the master distiller. It's where Jack Daniel's Distillery number 7 was located. The water stream, the spring, still runs through there to this day. And so that property she shared with us was for sale. And then she had her cousin, so now 2 people on Jack's side, she had her cousin call, and her cousin's a realtor. And so she offered to take us up to see this place. And the thought process was we'd go to see where some of this book actually took place, and that we'd be able to put some pieces together and it'd be a cool experience. But we bought the farm because we understood very quickly this is American history. And this kind of goes back to the story finding us, or all of this finding us, is because that property had been on the market for 15 months. How's the original home where Jack grew up, Jack Daniel Distillery number 7, how is that on the market for 15 months? And so I think that there's just certain elements of this that you have to look at it and just go, you know what? That was just meant to be, because it otherwise makes no sense whatsoever.
It sounds like fate was calling you.
Without question.
To Lynchburg. Is that how you feel about that moment?
I absolutely do.
And so from there, it wasn't the book that came first. It wasn't a movie, but you decided you're going to make whiskey. You're going to create a distillery. How did that idea evolve into actually whiskey is the best way to tell this story first of all?
Well, it became very simple to understand that the only reason we're still talking about Jack Daniel today, Johnny Walker, Jim Beam, is because we're still looking at their bottles every day. We're still seeing their branding out there. So take Jack Daniel, for instance. I didn't drink Jack Daniels, but I knew exactly what he looked like. But that's not because of books. There have been books about him. There's been movies. It's not because of that. It's because his name is still on a bottle. And so as I began meeting with Nearest's descendants, Jack's descendants, the community of Lynchburg, it was very clear that this story being told wide and far was important to everyone. And to do all of this work and then to have someone else come back and do it again, I learned really early into this process, I thought that the story of Nearest Green had just never been told at Jack Daniel's. That wasn't true. The entire time that Jack was alive, Jack's descendants ran the distillery. His last descendant to run the distillery, Reger Motlow, passed away in 1978. The story essentially died with him, the story of Nearest Green, because by 1979, it was removed from the tours there at the distillery. They were no longer talking about it within the company, where prior to 1978, it was so commonly talked about, nobody thought it was a big deal. And then within a year, it was gone. And so if it was that easy to erase the story once, how easy is it to erase it as we continue to have so many different mediums of media that are just every single day? All you have to do is walk through Times Square to literally be on information overload and hear Piccadilly Circus, right? You're like looking around and going, when did this happen? I remember walking down the street and there were no TVs, and this is like crazy to me, right? It's looking a little like Times Square, but we're getting information non-stop every single day. And so a book or a movie, it was very clear those would help to tell the story of Nearest, but it couldn't cement the legacy, because as quickly as a movie or a book comes out, another one comes out right afterwards. That makes you forget the prior one.
You said before this journey, you were not part of the whiskey industry. You had no prior experience in the whiskey industry. How was that experience for you entering the whiskey industry?
Yeah, well, I mean, the industry is literally set up for folks coming into it to have 2 scenarios. You either fail, or if by any chance you are able to actually grow in this industry as an independent, you can only grow so much before you have to sell. So your 2 options are you fail or you sell. And coming into this industry, I knew for certain I wasn't going to fail and I wasn't going to sell. So then I had to figure out what is the third option that I'm able to do that no woman or person of color before me has done. And so it was an absolute challenge. It still is an unbelievable challenge growing in this industry that is run by a very small number of spirit conglomerates. Where they move, the wind goes with them. And so we're constantly figuring out, how do we continue to grow in an environment that is so impacted by a small number of people? And we've been successful at it, and we continue to be successful at it. And, knock on wood, prayerfully, that will always be. But it is easy is never a word that I would use in regard to any aspect of what we have done.
What do you think you have done so right in order to avoid those two options that you said? You either enter and you fail, or you enter and you sell. What did you do right?
I think the first thing is that goes back to your first question about what gets me out of bed, what gets me excited. It's that purpose. I came into this knowing very clearly what my purpose was. It was not to be in the whiskey business. It was to be in the legacy cementing business. Those are two very different things. So if my goal is to make sure that Nearest Green, that his name and his legacy is known around the world, that's a much bigger goal than coming in and selling some bottles. And so my approach is so different than every other spirit company that has ever come before me. It is truly purpose driven. So coming into it, I had to eliminate every excuse. And the excuse that I heard the most, or the challenge I heard the most, was in regard to our 3-tier system, the distributors. That second tier, meaning I can't sell directly to you. I can't even sell to the bars and restaurants that sell to you. I have to sell in the US. I have to sell to a distributor. That distributor sells it to the restaurants and the bars. That means that the most powerful tier in our industry isn't the supplier or the buyer. It's the middleman. And so I had to figure out, okay, this has been around since Prohibition. Going in and dismantling it would be unwise. I have to go in and figure out how to succeed in this framework. And then I can give suggestions of how we move forward as an industry. But the priority was figuring out, how do I get in and succeed within the existing framework? And so, yes, a challenge without question, but also a challenge I think I was literally created for.
And in those early days, when you have your product, you're trying to get the distribution agreements, figure out this very complex industry. What were some of those earlier challenges that you faced?
Well, the distributors is a very tough challenge. I realized that most of the independent brands, when you would talk to them, they all had the same complaint, the distributors. The distributors don't do their job. The distributors don't pay them any attention. The distributors don't call them back. And so I decided very early on that distributors could not be a reason why we didn't succeed. So I removed that as an option. And I told our team, I said, if we fail, it will not be because of our distributors. And so I went to our distributors and said, listen, you're going to be high-priced FedEx for us. I get that. I know it. I don't have an expectation of you of anything more than that. There will come a day where my team and I would have built this to a place that, number one, you'll be excited to actually work for us. But number two, I will hold you accountable. And that time did come, but it didn't come within the first 5 years. For the first 5 years, they were simply high-priced FedEx.
You have grown quite substantially in a short time. Last year, you completed your distillery expansion. You have the visitor centre, an incredible sounding bar there as well. What was that like to be able to grow that part of the company last year?
Well, it's a big deal because with our distillery, it's now the 7th most visited distillery in the world. So if you think about how many distilleries you have out here in the UK, it's here, all the gin distilleries you have here, the Scotch distilleries in Scotland, the Irish whiskey distilleries in Ireland. If you think about all the distilleries around the world, you're talking about tens of thousands. Nearest Green Distillery is number 7 in the world of the number of visitors, over 250,000 visitors last year. And we just celebrated essentially our 5-year anniversary yesterday. So it was so important for us to be able to take the story directly to the consumer, to be able to share it directly, to not have to go through a distributor or anyone else to share the story of Nearest Green. We're able to tell it on our own, and we get to tell it to thousands of people every day that we're open.
That's a phenomenal number of people that are making that journey to visit the distillery, which must feel so incredible for you to know that story is getting out there. Do you find that people, how much do they know when they come? What is the draw for them?
Yeah, they tend to know a little bit. So some folks that come in are just coming in from Nashville. They saw a billboard in the airport, and they'll come down. We hold the Guinness World Record for the world's longest bar. So they'll come down for that, or they know the story and they traveled in specifically to see it and to support us. And so you have 2, 3, 4 very different types of groups of people, but they all have a reason for coming. So in terms of people who know the story before they come, they know a version of this story. You know, the story has morphed so many times, and people will say the story to me and I'm like cringing inside going, no, please don't repeat that. But still, you have a lot of people who have heard some portion of the story, and just on the basis of that portion of the story have made their way to Shelbyville, Tennessee.
Another thing I find really interesting about the story, the brand, and the journey that you've been on is that you, from what I've seen, you've maintained a very positive relationship with Jack Daniel's as a brand. And I was reading that when you opened the distillery, Jack Daniel's actually put out an advert in a local publication to congratulate you on the opening, which is remarkable. How did that feel to get that kind of support from a brand that really could have seen you as a threat, maybe part of the story that they didn't want to associate with theirs? What was that like?
Well, it was all those things, by the way. So you had people within the company that felt the first way you talked about, who put an advertisement and supported us. And then you also had people in that company who felt the opposite of that, did not feel as though we should have a great relationship. They saw us as a competitor, and they treated us as such. And so you did have 2 very different sides sort of warring internally. And I can say the good side won, because there's nobody who was opposed to Uncle Nearest or Nearest Green is still with the company. Everyone who remained with the company, who's still with them, are people who always, at least from the time I brought the story forth and they learned that the story was genuinely a good story. And I've been out there sharing it with the world now for the last 7 years. They saw that it was a benefit to them. So we do have absolutely a mutual respect between our 2 companies. I also think that they see it as greatly beneficial to them.
And when, going back to sort of the earlier days of researching the story and then making the decision to bring out a whiskey, did you have conversations with Jack Daniel's to bring them into that journey and to, make sure that it was for the benefits of everybody?
Well, what I did was I showed them the marketing plan before it ever came out, 3 months beforehand, because I wanted them to not have a knee-jerk reaction when it came into the marketplace. Now, I did not welcome their feedback, because this is my company and I don't give unsolicited feedback to them about their company. But I did want them to see it so that they knew that everything that we were doing was so positive toward their namesake. And I also wanted them to see that we weren't going to come anywhere near their trademarks, and we'd appreciate it if they didn't come anywhere near ours. And so we built a relationship on the basis of mutual respect. And we built it on the basis of the relationship that our 2 namesake founders had.
And going back to your book and the story that is being told in this book, it's not just about the history, as you said. It's about community. It's about storytelling. It's about the power of storytelling. And there's so much emotion and different topics that are covered in the book. How significant has this journey of writing this book and putting pen to paper to tell your story, to tell Neera's story, been for you?
Oh, it's been so important, and the response from it has been extraordinary. You hear a lot, and you see it posted on social media a lot, that men are reading the book in 2 days, and you have a lot of men that are posting reviews and saying, I can't remember the last time I read a book cover to cover. It is a story that literally, as you're reading it, it sort of seeps in, and people are finding themselves in the book. They're connecting with the challenges, the overcoming, the love, the honor, the respect, and their desire for it. And so this book, what it's doing is it's laying the groundwork for Neera's name to become ubiquitous around the world. So it was absolutely important that this book was written and that it came out when it did.
Whiskey has long been known as a very male-dominated industry. As a woman in whiskey, what has your experience been like?
It's been great for me because I don't mind being underestimated. I actually love it. I thrive in it. And so a lot of people they just outwardly need to prove to other people who they are. And I don't have that. I truly love being in this industry because I like being the person that can come in and break down barriers. I like being the person who is able to help others see what could be if they embraced people of different backgrounds, different color, different race, different political affiliations, if they would expand their mind and the people around them, their circle. And so for me, it has been, I think it's been pretty amazing. And I will say, coming into this industry 8 years ago now, I have seen more white men fail than any other group. And so I don't believe that the challenges by any way, shape, or form are limited to women and people of color. But the fact that I get to break and pull down some barriers on behalf of that 70% of the population in America makes me extraordinarily proud.
And it should do. What are some of those barriers that you have faced that you believe you have been able to pull down and make it a bit easier for the next person to come along?
Well, I've shown people how you can build this as an independent. That path wasn't available before Uncle Neera's. And I am very clear with opening the door, holding it open, and sharing with everyone how you get there. And so the things that I've learned, I've shared in real time. The successes that we've had, I've shared those in real time. And I've done that so that it makes the person coming or the people coming behind me in the same industry so that they can get things done twice as fast as we did by making half the mistakes.
How much do you see your attitude and your approach to friendships, working relationships, holding the door open for others in the relationship between Jack Daniel and Neera's Green?
I see it a lot. Someone said to me recently that when they opened the pages of the book, they expected that who I would relate to more would be Neera's. But what they gathered while reading it was who I related to more was Jack. And not related to in terms of race or culture, but related to in terms of we both left home very early. We both became entrepreneurs. We both had to be very creative in how we built our businesses when nobody believed in us. We had to go in and learn every job, not learn it because we were going to do it, but learn it because we needed to know it in case we weren't able to have people that could do it on our behalf. And the ability to challenge the system to make the system work for you. All of those different things are Jack and how I also live. We both are PR people through and through. Jack was a PR man. He walked around with the tail and a top cap, and tails and shoes with a lift on it. And he'd walk into bars and put down silver dollars and challenge people to try his whiskey. And he'd say, it's going to be the best you have ever had. And so he literally was a walking, talking PR marketing person. So am I. But what I love is that being able to market this, being able to utilize PR, my PR background, to share this story to people like you and all over the world, that is a connection that Jack and I have. And so people will find when I'm talking about both Jack and Nearest, I'm very protective of both, like I knew them in real life. And so hopefully on the other side, I'll meet them both.
Amazing to hear that. And I wonder, you are so close to the Nearest Green story. And so when you were writing the book, was there anything that surprised you along the way during that writing journey?
There were a lot of things that surprised me during the writing journey, and the town of Lynchburg and how they gathered together, even though the areas around them were incredibly intolerant of people of color. And yet this little town, with Lynch in the name of all things, this little town had created this level of respect among each other during a period of time where it wasn't required at all. Like, it wasn't normal in the least bit. And so as I really dove into that community and into the story of Nearest and Jack, I realized that it's very likely that the reason why the racism stayed on the outskirts of Lynchburg, Tennessee, and I can say, because Nearest Green's great-great-granddaughter is our master blender, Victoria Edie Butler, 4-time master blender of the year. She is unbelievable. But she will tell you she never experienced racism until she left Lynchburg. She's now 62 years old. And so the question became, how in the world did this town get like this? No other town around it is like it. How did that happen? And I could only conclude that if the big man in town, like the man that is most respected above everyone else, if he was always flanked by African Americans, if he treated African Americans with so much equality that you had them applying for jobs, coming from outside of the area to apply for jobs there because they learned that he hired and he paid based on tenure, not based on race, and he hired based on skill, not based on connection. And so all of these things transformed an entire community in the middle of rural Southern America, not like South America, but literally the South within America. And so that was I would probably say, the most surprising part to me. And also the part that excites me the most because of what's going on in America right now in regard to race relations, where we seem to be going backwards a bit, that I can look to this story for the way to move forward. And it's crazy that we have to go back to a story in the 19th century to figure out how to move forward today. But I'm happy the story now exists because it's giving us the blueprint for how to do that.
Is it concerning? Well, it must be concerning to an extent, but how much is that kind of change in dynamic, and as you said, those steps backwards that you're seeing in the US, how much is that playing on your mind, on your business plan, on your overall, your overall ambition for the Uncle Nearest brand?
It doesn't play into it at all, because my ambition is so great in terms of what I want to see happen in this lifetime. And so I have to be able to go with the ebb and flow of America and the world overall. Geopolitical issues here in this part of the world impact us and vice versa. And so we're now living in such a global society that because things are happening in America, that it is important, but I have to look at the entire world. Every place that I'm bringing Uncle Nearest into, I have to look at that. I have to know what's going on in London because Uncle Nearest is here. And so I look at it as, I will not be shaken, I will not be moved, I will not be dissuaded or persuaded to do anything other than what I have set out to do. So I don't care who's in the White House. I don't care what the political landscape is of America. I don't care what the race implications are. My eye is on the prize, and I am unwavering in that.
Yes, I can definitely see that you absolutely know where you want to go and what you want to do in order to get there. On a global scale, how, since you came into the whiskey industry, do you think the industry has changed in terms of its attitude to women in whiskey and its attitude to women of color in whiskey as well?
I think it's a big difference because when we came in, there were really no other women. I mean, that people were talking about. You had a few women here and there that were sort of legacy women, but they're the only ones anyone would ever talk about because they were like the only ones. And now I can point to every company and tell you a large number of women that are in charge of different areas at those companies in our industry. That's when you consider how short of a time frame it is from when we began this, when we rolled this out in 2017, and as we began to gain success pretty quickly, then all these companies began trying to reverse engineer the success to try to figure it out. And in those boardrooms around the world, controlling our markets in the industry, one of the things that was coming out was, well, she's a woman, she hired all women, and so they're really focused on marketing to everyone, not just a segment of the population.
It's amazing to see the impact that can have when you take the blinkers off and are very open to hiring, regardless of gender, regardless of race, and the insights that can give you in a team.
Well, it's just good business. When you're looking at, and I have to look at the demographics of the world and update my numbers, I don't know, I can tell you just in America, women and people of color are the majority. Combined, we're 70% of the country. So any person who doesn't, that has a consumer brand, and you don't know how to market to women and people of color, you're a few years from being extinct. And I think that companies have figured that out. The growth of Uncle Nearest in an industry that was had historically locked us out means to them that they have to figure out how to adapt very quickly because it's moving very quickly. And they don't want to get left behind. And so I do believe we're going to see more women, more people of color being hired, being funded so that they can have their own businesses in this industry. It's a beautiful thing. We've got a lot of work to do, but we have come a long way in the last 7 years, a really long way.
I agree with you. I think it's definitely evident that the industry is moving in the right direction. But like you said, there is a lot still to be done to make this a more inclusive industry. What do you think are some practical things that we in the industry can do to help us move things forward even more in terms of women in whiskey?
Put more women and people at the top, people of color. Because the thing is that there is a lack of familiarity at the top. We always attribute it, or often it's attributed to either racism or gender bias or all these different things. And a lot of it is simply familiarity. So if you take a little white girl, you take a little black girl, you take them into a toy store and you say, choose the doll, any doll, and you give them, literally they could go down every aisle and choose a doll. The little black girl is going to come back with a little black doll, and the little white girl is going to come back with a little white doll. That has nothing to do with racism. That has nothing to do with sexism. That has nothing to do with anything other than familiarity. And so if you don't have women and people of color at the top, you are never going to fix the diversity and inclusion issues within the companies because there's a lack of familiarity.
Yeah, representation is so important, and the visibility to see that happen as well.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned before that similarities between you and Jack Daniel that you see is this entrepreneurial spirit that you both have and had. What makes a good entrepreneur?
Not giving up. I tell people all of the time, if you are the quitting kind, do not start. do not even try to be an entrepreneur, because what people see as failure really truly is not failure. What it is someone gave up. So for entrepreneurs, the only way you get to a point of success, because you will have things that happen on a very regular basis that will make you want to quit. The difference between a successful entrepreneur and an entrepreneur that failed is the one who gave up and the one who didn't. That's literally the only difference. When you look at successful entrepreneurs, no matter the challenge, no matter the failure in air quotes, they kept going. And so I do believe that is this ability to not quit. The other thing is that this ability to not be knocked off because of challenges. I don't focus on challenges ever. I look at it as a race, and those challenges are hurdles, and I'm a hurdler. I believe that every entrepreneur has to be a hurdler. You have to have the mindset that the challenges are going to be there, and your job isn't to focus on the challenges. Your job is to remember what the rhythm needs to be of your run and your jump so that you can get through and over those challenges as quickly as possible. But if you're expecting a clear track, you need to go work for somebody else. You cannot be an entrepreneur and expect a clear track in your race.
Yeah, that's a great advice to give. And in terms of advice, if there was anybody listening who, maybe they have the start of an idea, they want to start their own brand, they want to go make their own company, what advice would you give them for those very early days?
You need to do a very thorough business plan. And that business plan needs to include a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And during that SWOT analysis, your threats and your weaknesses should be so thorough that you almost talk yourself out of the business. Because when you're going to pitch investors, if you are all blue sky and you are not realistic about how you could lose their money and why, and the different threats, then you're not able to really overcome them because you've not thought through them. So the beauty of a SWOT analysis and going so deep and looking at not just everyone who has succeeded, but everyone who has failed. I can't even tell you the number of celebrities that have come to me wanting to start a liquor brand, and their reason every single time is George Clooney. I'm like, y'all, do you realize for every George Clooney, there was like 500 celebrities who have already tried and failed? You have to know why those failed. And every single time, everyone is focused on George's success or Ryan's success. I'm like, y'all, that's like 2 out of hundreds. And so make sure that you are, and this is celebrity, no celebrity, whatever, make sure you are looking at this and finding out the ones that failed, why did they fail? And what is your solution to what caused them to fail?
That's great advice. And the celebrity spirits point you made is very true, because it really is not, as we've said a couple of times, it's not easy to start your own brand. There are so many brands out there. It's a very saturated market. It's a very expensive market.
Very expensive. To market marketing in London is like, whoa, through the roof. Yeah, it's hard.
It is hard. And I think from the outside, it can often be seen as, a very glossy, shiny industry. But actually, no, it takes an awful lot to make it work. I'm also glad you mentioned celebrities, because I'm taking every opportunity I can at the moment to talk about this. I would love to know what you think about Beyoncé entering the American whiskey category.
Yeah, I think everybody who wants to come into the American whiskey category, it just elevates us. So whoever wants to come in, if you're going to help us sell more cases, I would love to see American whiskey as the largest category of spirits in the world. Whoever's going to help us get there, come on in.
Yeah, there's room for more.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of Uncle Nearest and growing that brand, what can we expect to come next from Uncle Nearest whiskey?
You're going to see, because of where the market is going right now, you have a lot of companies, all of the big guys are deciding, because capital is costly right now. So the distributors don't have the line of credits they used to have to be able to buy as many cases. The off-premise, the off-trade here, also doesn't have those line of credits to be able to sit on thousands of cases as they may have done before. You all didn't do that as much as we do it in the U.S., but in the U.S. in particular, you're seeing a lot less being purchased, and you also are seeing theft go through the roof, which is causing a lot of the retailers in the U.S. to destock. So we've got three things happening that is really harming the industry simultaneously. It's the destocking because of the theft. You have the high cost of capital, which is causing everyone, if they used to buy 20 cases at a time, they're buying 10. If they bought 10 at a time, they're buying 5. Those who bought 5 at a time are buying 1. You're also seeing a lot of the bigger club stores and things of that nature take such tiny margins that now they're driving the price down. So with all of this going on, every single big guy, for whatever reasons I still don't understand, have all decided they're going to slash their prices and offer these insane deals to try to pump up volume, to make sure they don't close a quarter down double digits. And I get that. I get it. But the challenge is they're making permanent decisions on a temporary problem. The cost of capital isn't going to continue to be this high. They will figure out the theft issue. But what's happening is because they're doing that, they're causing an artificial trade down of the consumers. The consumers weren't asking for the prices to be lowered until the prices started being lowered. Now they have that expectation. And so for Uncle Nearest, because this is the long game, for me, I am not going to play with the pricing of Uncle Nearest. The pricing integrity must remain intact, even while everyone around us is dropping. And so the question became, well, how do we deal with this environment, what everyone around us is doing, but hold on to our long-term strategy and our pricing integrity? It became very simple, is entering a new product into the marketplace that matches the price point that everyone is dropping to. And so you'll see that coming down the pike in about the next 4 weeks.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Very cool. And that sounds like a very smart way to navigate what you just explained, which sounds incredibly complex, but without making those knee-jerk reactions, as you said, to hopefully a short-term problem that is going to take a long time to recover, because, as you said, once you put the prices down,
you can't take them back up.
It's hard to take them back up and to expect people to still gravitate towards your brand.
Yeah, consumers do not allow you to go back up once you've dropped them. And so everyone who's dropping, they're going to have to live at that price point. And there are certain brands that when we came into this industry in 2017 in American whiskey, that I have watched them every single time during COVID, every single time something has happened, they've dropped. And a brand that used to be on the shelf at $30, I can now get a local grocery store for $15. They can't go back. Like, that is now what the consumer expects. And so I am adamant that we're an ultra premium brand, a super, whatever people call it, wherever they are. But we are a brand that is going to hold our pricing integrity and maintain that. But we also are going to make sure that we are able to play and grow in this market that's being artificially created at the current moment because of panic. And I don't play the panic game.
Fawn, what has been the most challenging part of being an entrepreneur during your professional career?
You know, again, I think I go back to the example of the hurdles. If you talk to Cindy McLaughlin and you ask her about the hurdles, she won't be able to tell you. They're there. That's their intention. That's what separates me from the pack, is the fact that I'm never expecting a clear race. I'm expecting those hurdles to be there, and I'm going to focus on how I respond to them being there, but I'm not actually going to focus on the challenges themselves. And so people ask me all the time, what's the greatest challenge you've ever faced? I'm like, I don't know. That's literally like asking a hurdler, which hurdle in the race was the hardest? I don't know. Which one did I knock over? That one. But you literally, I think that too many people, they focus so intently on the challenges ahead, that they're not able to get over them in the amount of time that I'm able to get over them and to keep going. Because I expect them. I expect them to be there, and I expect them to be hard.
On the flip side of that, what has been your favorite part of your entrepreneurial journey?
Growth. Growth in how I lead, growth in outlook, growth in how I am able to take something from inception of an idea to execution in a fraction of the time that it takes most people to be able to do something similar. I think learning that I am so wired to do exactly what it is that I am doing is the most exciting thing, because it reaffirms that I am literally just at the beginning of this journey.
Being at the beginning of your journey, there is an awful lot to come. What do you hope will be, or what is your ultimate ambition with Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey?
That Nearest Green's name is ubiquitous around the world, that I can go into any country and say the name Nearest Green, and whether people drink or not, they still know his legacy.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Fawn, for being on our podcast today. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to talk to you.